for me and lots of other medics, the evidence base for SARS-CoV-2 being airborne is categorically correct and there for all to see. So why isn't this scientific evidence being accepted?
So that's the $1 million question. But I would say, and I can give you my approximation. I have thought a lot about that question because I've been puzzled by the resistance. Early in the pandemic, I thought, once we explain to people on Twitter or on papers or whatever what's going on, then they will understand. But that hasn't happened. The resistance continues in many places, right? We've convinced some people, or some people have accepted it, but many have not. Even though it's now on the WHO webpage, they say it's airborne, but still many other public health agencies don't accept it, and many maybe will accept it and will put it on the webpage, but then they won't promote the measures, the masks, the ventilation, whatever, that go along with that acceptance, right? So they take an intermediate position. So why is that? I think there are two reasons, or two families of reasons, right? One is scientific or scientific sociology and history, and the other one is political. And these two reasons are kind of reinforcing each other, right? So the scientific reason has to do with what I've mentioned earlier in the program. So there was an error, and people, good faith scientists really believed this was a droplet disease because it behaved like the flu, which they thought was a droplet disease. And it's true that early on it behaved like the flu. The problem is that the flu is also airborne. And that's also something that they had rejected for the same reasons, right? So there was this error that, as I mentioned, comes from 1910. And this error is worth reviewing the history briefly. Why could that error get so ingrained? And it really we have to go back to 2,500 years ago. Hippocrates in ancient Greece, basically he came up with the theory of miasmas. They said when a lot of people are getting infected at the same time with the same disease, it must really be the air because it's what we have most in common, right? And so he put forward that hypothesis. And so then basically for two millennia, basically humankind thought we were getting infected through the air. And that was the dominant. There were other theories, but that was the dominant theory, right? And we get to 1850, not that long ago, less than 2 centuries ago, and that was the dominant theory, was the miasmas, right? And that was very scary. You could get tuberculosis or something just by breathing it in. There was little you could do to defend yourself. It was also kind of phantasmagorical. They didn't understand dilution, right? It's not that you are breathing the air coming out of another person, but the disease may come from putrid matter miles away, and then you get infected. And so Chapin in 1910 thinks is more contact transmission. Is when we are close to someone and when we touch them, that's when we get infected. And he comes at the right time, because I was saying until the 1850s, it was really the miasmas were dominant. But then in the 1850s, John Snow shows that cholera, which was thought to transmit through the air, really transmits through water, right? And then Ignaz Semmelweis in Vienna shows that puerperal fever, that was thought to transmit through the air, is transmitted through hands. And if you wash your hands, the cases go down. And then later in the 1890s, there's other scientists that show that malaria is bad air in Italian. It had always been thought to be bad air. And then they show, no, it's not the air, it's mosquitoes, right? So now, so we had thought for millennia that it was the air. And then suddenly all these big diseases that are, kill a lot of people are shown. So then there is people wonder, was the air a superstition all along, and really is not important, right? And there was a fluid period, but Chapin, who was someone very respected, says the air doesn't happen. That was a superstition. We should accept progress and germ theory, and really is contact. Is when we touch other people, or these spray droplets that fall to the ground, whatever. And he is too successful. People, he's taken as progress. People are tired of the air, that you cannot defend yourself, and he's successful because distance reduces disease transmission, and so does washing our hands for some diseases, whatever. So that becomes a dogma, right? And now, during the 20th century, basically there is a resistance. And even since the 30s, William Wells and other researchers were trying to show that diseases like tuberculosis and measles were airborne. but they were considered droplet diseases, right? And for decades and decades, measles, which now is used as a prototypical airborne disease, it was accepted in 1985 after 7 decades of telling us it was a droplet disease. So this wasn't easy to demonstrate, and they were not eager to accept it. And there is even a paper on smallpox. There was a clear airborne outbreak where basically someone in a hospital infected all these other people that were in other rooms. And when you put the smoke in the room of the infected person, it went to the rooms of the people who got infected. So it was clear it was through the air. And there is a report from that basically done in collaboration with WHO that says, we look at the other possibilities, whether it was surfaces or droplets, and it was impossible. So then we got to airborne transmission with the inhalation of aerosols, which it was a possibility against which all the investigators were prejudiced. So they admitted that was the mood throughout the 20th century, that airborne is something very unlikely, and that propagates all the way to 2020. When the pandemic starts and the WHO starts a committee, and in that committee there are 0 experts on airborne transmission, but 6 experts on hand washing, that's the history, right? Now, those people who were very prominent and made an enormous error. They said in March of 2020 that saying that the disease was airborne was misinformation. Now, they said that what was misinformation is actually the main mode of transmission. And the things that work for that main mode of transmission, which are masks and ventilation, whatever, we were not told they were important until much, much later, for example, by WHO, right? So that error that certain people made in public health and infectious diseases has led to a lot of deaths and economic losses and whatever. Now, some of those people have accepted it, some do not want to, and I've been told by one of them in private that we need to find a way that we can accept this and we can save face. So it's not like he doesn't disagree that we're right, it's just he wants to save face, right? And WHO is a little bit on that department. They will put it on the webpage because it will be scientifically embarrassing not to accept it, but then they don't say it. If you search the Twitter feed of WHO for the word airborne, it's not there, basically, in the last 2 years. So that's one reason, I think, is there was this enormous error that was a good faith error at the beginning, but then it has turned into really not wanting to admit that you were wrong, and that your error caused a lot of death and economic damage and disease. The other reason I think is political, right? Because that alone wouldn't be enough, right? If for example we were saying, well, it's transmitted through water or something that was easier to control, let's just filter the water. The governments will have jumped at that and will have said, oh, this is so much easier to do than all these other things we're doing, right? But what we're telling governments is more difficult to do. Governments love the droplets and the surfaces. Why? Because, if you're getting infected because you're basically not washing your hands enough and you're touching your face, or because you're not keeping your distance, right? That kind of thing. If you get infected, it's your fault. You didn't wash your hands, you didn't keep your distance. It's all your individual responsibility. So the governments can tell people what to do, but the governments don't have to do so much, right? On the other hand, if you get infected by breathing air that has the virus in a school, in a government building, in a company, now you as a student or as a teacher in the school, you don't have the power to clean that air and remove the virus from the air. That's a responsibility of the school, of the government, of the company. And that's something that costs some money, and then you have to take the responsibility. If you don't do it, then you are liable. For example, in the US, for not having done it, people can sue you and things like that. So I think that's something that's a very important reason why they keep us as we, that they don't want to admit it clearly, and that they want to keep saying, even though when it has been so clear, and with Omicron, and it's just so transmissible, how could anyone believe that that's still the surfaces and the droplets, especially when everyone is so paranoid about hydroalcoholic gel and all that,